Welcome to Ogles channel, thanks for watching today. Let's continue our journey to finish every single Game Boy and Game Boy Color game, and today we're going to focus on a game called Final Fantasy Adventure. Now first off, this game has like nothing to do with Final Fantasy at all, except for like a little hint here or there, because this is actually the first game in the entire Mana series. You know, like Secret of Mana or Trials of Mana, or like all the other Mana games. This was the very first one that like started the entire storyline with the Tree of Mana, and honestly it's a really fun game, and it really sort of sets the action RPG into motion here that the Mana series is so well known for. It's like a Zelda game to some degree, but it's also like a Final Fantasy game as far as like the RPG elements. It's almost for like all the retro players out there, if there was a game that sort of bridged the gap between the first Legend of Zelda and the second Legend of Zelda, this would be like the first Mana game, at least for me anyway, because it's going to have all the action of the Zelda game, but also all the little leveling up and all the magic of Zelda 2, but it's still simply an overhead game just like Zelda 1. And that analogy might not make a lot of sense if you're not a retro player, but just know if you like Zelda games in general, you're going to like Final Fantasy Adventure. So let's just go ahead and dive into it. Now, I always like to start the videos off by looking at the box art for the game. As much as I like to cover for Final Fantasy Adventure, you can't say it's like original in any form or fashion, because like all the Final Fantasy games of this time period were using like almost an identical cover. I mean, look at Final Fantasy 2 for the SNES. I mean, it looks exactly the same, has the same font, has the same little sword, little shine coming off the sword. The background color is different, but I mean, come on, it's the same cover. Or Final Fantasy Legend 2 or Final Fantasy Legend 3. All of these are the exact same cover. They just simply change the background color and then just tweak the title a little bit as well and just sort of roll it on out there. I like the cover, but you can't say it's, you know, unique for Secret of Mana or the Mana series at all. Now it does say over here at the side, action role-playing game, which of course is trying to describe the game as good as possible. 2 megabytes of memory, which I can't imagine that like being a selling point for anybody. Did anyone ever turn a game down because it's like 1 megabyte of memory, or really buy a game because it said 2? I can't imagine that mattering to consumers like at all. It also says 80-page player's strategy manual, and this is like really huge for the time period. I mean, like all games came with a manual, but they were usually like 5, 10, maybe 20 pages if you were lucky. 80 pages? Holy cow. So I actually looked up the manual for the game, and I have to say, like, I was actually pretty impressed by it because it actually gave like a full background of the story that wasn't explained inside the game. Gave like what every weapon does, what every spell does, who all the major characters are. It actually gave like a full player's guide for the first like probably a third of the game. So strategy manual, it actually summarizes what they gave you pretty darn well, and that's a pretty welcome addition for the game. And it winds the facts out here by saying battery saves game in progress. And I know, you know, nowadays that doesn't seem like a big deal, but at this time period, a lot of games were still relying on the password system. So the idea that you could save your game like whenever you wanted to, and in this particular game, you didn't have to like search out someone to save your game. You could just simply pause it, save the game, and pick up exactly where you paused. And so that's a pretty important feature as well. And not to spend too much time on the cover because I want to get into the main game itself, but I do want to point out one more thing. It says down at the bottom, Sunsoft, who is the publisher of the game, and they leave off the entire cover here that Squaresoft developed the game. And I know like nowadays, that's like a huge selling point, way over Sunsoft, but at the time, as I mentioned in like a Batman video a few weeks back, Sunsoft was like at the top of their game during this time period. And so like putting Sunsoft on there was almost like a game changer as far as like sales are going to go. And so leaving off Squaresoft, maybe they shouldn't have left it off completely, but I totally understand why they put Sunsoft on there instead. Now, as soon as you turn the game on, you might as well just simply turn the volume on your Game Boy up all the way, because you want Squaresoft's like most beautiful or melancholy songs that I've ever heard playing in the background, and it like fits the mood for the game like completely perfectly, because the game deals with a lot of death and sadness, as well as like self-sacrifice, and this song here like really just sort of symbolizes that mood perfectly, at least for me anyway. And so like I don't think they could have constructed or orchestrated any better song for this game on the title screen. And then the story begins to scroll up here, and it weaves us a tale of a tree of mana set inside the Mana Sanctuary that basically gives life to the entire planet around it. And it says whoever touches the Tree of Mana gains the power of the tree and can use that power for good or for evil. And of course there's a fellow known as the Dark Lord, and I think his name gives it away. He wants to touch the Tree of Mana, take over, and just basically wreak havoc or chaos across the entire planet and become an overlord of the entire world. And obviously it's going to be up to us to try to stop the Dark Lord from fulfilling his evil destiny. Now, while this story is pretty good, if you look in the game's manual, I mean, it's 80 pages long, it has a much better backstory for the game. And it actually tells the tale of a time this has happened before, where the Emperor of Vandal was trying to take over the Tree of Mana, and the Gemini Knights stood up against him, defeated him, and they actually sealed the Tree of Mana behind a waterfall with a pendant that needed to be used to open up the waterfall or reverse the falls to get to the tree. And this is hinted at a little bit throughout the game. However, the manual lays it out so much better, but I do understand they didn't want to overload you in dialogue about this epic battle that took place hundreds of years ago. So they're just simply setting us up with the most simple, basic story possible. Tree of Mana, Dark Lord trying to take it, we're going to try to stop it. Simple as that. Now when you begin the game, obviously you get to name your hero. I named my hero Ogle because Ogles wouldn't fit. And you also get to name a co-protagonist, and I named her Rach after my wife Rachel, and Rachel wouldn't fit. So those are going to be our two heroes for the game here. Now when the game officially begins here, they throw you immediately into the action because you are a gladiator fighting for the Dark Lord's enjoyment. I mean, that sort of tells you how evil he is right off the bat. But regardless, they put this giant tiger out there to fight against you, and you have to figure out how to attack, what this giant stamina bar down at the bottom even means, because you don't know it's a stamina bar. And so you're trying to figure out how to defeat this tiger cat, how to survive, and once you finally defeat the tiger cat, you get to go into the gladiators, I guess, hall here, or a little behind the scenes area, I guess the dressing room of sorts of the gladiators. And there's your friend Willie, who's just simply lying on the ground. And obviously that's not a good sign. So you go up to Willie here, and Willie basically tells you that the Tree of Mana is in danger. How he knows that, we don't know. But he does instruct us that we need to go find a Gemini Knight named Bogart who lives near the falls to basically try to defend against the invasion on the Mana Tree. Now, once again, if you read the manual, you know that the Gemini Knights are the ones who defended it against the war against the king or the emperor of Vandal. And so it makes more sense that we're trying to search out a Gemini Knight at this point. But regardless, Willie breathes his last breath here and he passes away right in front of us. So immediately, into the game here, we have our first death of a character within the first, 30 seconds to a minute, depending on how fast you defeat that cat. And so Willie was a very short-lived character, but it did set us on our mission here. We have to go find Bogart, who's a Gemini Knight, tries to defend against the Dark Lord taking over the Tree of Mana. However, my first objective, I gotta figure out how to get out of the gladiator arena that I'm stuck in here. So I talked to some of the fellow gladiators. There's one named Amanda, who will appear later on in the game as well. And she gives me some pretty direct instructions like how to escape from this little area to pursue my destiny. And so I follow her instructions. I end up having to fight another giant cat, but I eventually make it out of the arena. I head over to the waterfall, and wouldn't you know it, there is Dark Lord, there's his assistant Julius, and they're trying to figure out how to get up to the Tree of Mana that's on top of the waterfall here. And they do come to the conclusion that there is one girl who has the power to reverse the falls and allow them to go up to the Tree of Mana. But then they overhear me, because I'm clearly eavesdropping here, and they get upset and they basically kick me off a cliff here. And miraculously, I somehow survived this massive fall off the cliff. And when I get down to the bottom, the game officially opens up, and it feels almost identical to Link's Awakening here, because you have all these little enemies, running around. You have your sword, your shield you don't get to physically put up, but you do have a shield, and of course you can attack all the enemies. And every time you attack an enemy, you're going to get experience points, and the more experience points you get, the more you can level up. And you can level up 4 separate categories. You can level up your stamina bar, you can level up your health bar, you can level up your power of your attacks, or you can level up your wisdom, which is your magic attacks. And of course at the start of the game, I level up almost exclusively my power, because I want to be as powerful of a character as possible. And anytime you do level up a stat, it does level up some of the stats around it. So you're not going to be lopsided on whichever power you go for. It's just simply which one you want to focus for. But regardless, when I'm fighting off all of these monsters, I finally come to one of my little screens here, and there's a girl over there who has basically a dying friend beside her, and all these monsters are surrounding them. I fight off the monsters, and then the girl tells me her name is Rach, and her friend's name is Hasim, and they were on their way to find Bogart, who was the Gemini Knight, because they're trying to also figure out how to protect the Tree of Mana. What a coincidence, we're on the same journey. But Hasim, once again, just like my friend Willie, her friend Hasim passes away immediately, and now we have 2 deaths immediately inside the game. So we're 10 minutes in now, 15 minutes in, and 2 characters have already died. I think the sad, melancholy tune at the beginning of the game is already fitting pretty well with the story that they are beginning to craft here. But regardless, Rach and I are officially a team inside the game. We're fighting off all these monsters, we're leveling our character up, trying to get ourselves more and more powerful, all along the while searching for Bogart. And we finally come across this little cabin here, and there's this standoffish little fella inside there. And wouldn't you know it, this is Bogart, the legendary Gemini Knight who helps to protect the Tree of Mana the first time. But he doesn't really want to talk to us until he sees a pendant on Rachel's necklace. And when he sees that pendant, he realizes that's the same pendant that was used to protect the tree last time. And so he knows that Rachel is, of course, the chosen one to help protect the tree again this time. And I guess, me being around her, I'm sort of, led into the club by association. But Bogart tells us there's a mattock in the next room. We can use that to break rocks, break walls, things such as that. That's going to help us on our journey. And he tells us to go to the town of Wendell now to find Sheba. And thus begins a mechanic in the game that might actually turn a lot of players off, because the game is very linear as far as like talk to someone, they tell you where to go, who to talk to. You go there, talk to that person, they're going to tell you where to go, who to talk to next, and it's just simply connecting the dots inside the game. It's a very, very linear path. The game like never opens up and like just simply says, hey, explore the area, find some secrets, find some new items. It basically tells you where to go, who to talk to constantly, and there's not like a lot of reason to explore the game except for the fact that you're going to get lost inside the overworld. You're not going to find any secrets, any collectibles, anything like that. You're just simply going to get lost a lot, because look at the map here. Because this is the very first time I pulled the map up inside the game, was at this moment trying to figure out where to go, and it's a very bare bones map. And so like the game is linear, yes, it tells you where to go, yes, but it is very convoluted and very hard to understand and figure out where that location is and how to get to that location. But regardless, we're on our way to our next town, so of course we're fighting as many monsters as we can, trying to level up, gain that experience points. We stop in at a little shop here, I buy a battle axe, which is going to be a better weapon than my sword, and if the stamina bar is fully charged up, I actually have like a throwing attack. Any item you have in the game, or any weapon you have, if the stamina bar reaches all the way to the top, you do have a special attack with that particular weapon, which is actually a really cool fighting mechanic inside the game. And so I did get the battle axe, which is definitely better than the sword, at least for this moment in the game, and begin to fight more and more enemies. However, when you're fighting these enemies, whether it be jellyfish or, ghost or whichever these little monsters are in the early levels, you begin to notice a fairly annoying mechanic in the game, and you do get more used to it as the game goes. But anytime you hit a monster with a particular weapon, it doesn't like stun the monster or knock them back, like in a Zelda game for instance. Anytime you hit a monster, it just simply stays there, and then it can jump and attack you, and then you get knocked back. But anytime you attack a monster, it doesn't actually force the monster to be retreated back or knocked back a little bit. And so you end up getting hit a lot because you walk right up to the monster, attack, and then the monster just simply moves one square and hits you. And so I can't say like the fighting I'm a big fan of inside the game. I do love an action RPG just about more than any other genre of game. But I do also like my action RPGs to show when the enemy got hit and have some sort of reaction to that. Like I said, this is not like a game breaker or anything, and I got used to this fighting mechanic as the game continues, but at the very beginning of the game, because I was so used to all the enemies having a reaction to being hit, this really did throw me off and had to change my fighting style a good bit throughout the game. But as we're fighting, we eventually come to this little hotel here, and we go into the hotel, and there's a fellow named Mr. Lee who is staying there. And we can't approach Mr. Lee, we can't visit Mr. Lee, but evidently he's pretty darn important. And we talked to a few other people inside the hotel as well who tell us like there's a bronze key, and there's a lizard people down south, and there's just, a bunch of little cryptic clues that we get here. But Rachel suggests that we stay the night at the hotel, and as at the night at the hotel, she does teach me a magic spell that she knows called Cure, which is going to be basically like your heal spell. Anytime you have injuries, you're low on HP, you can use this spell, and you can basically restore your entire health, or a great portion of your health. However, Rach is kidnapped in the middle of the night from the hotel, so naturally the mission to Wendell takes a backseat, and I begin to search for Rachel throughout the environment here. Now, as I'm journeying through this, I do end up coming across the cave. I go into the cave, and there's a fellow there who volunteers his time out of the kindness of his heart to help me find Rach. However, there are 3 major red flags on this particular fella. First off, he doesn't give me his actual name, big red flag. Second off, he knows exactly where Rach is being held, huge red flag. And third off, he says Rachel is being held in a room full of caskets. Like, holy cow, how many red flags can you have? Especially that third one, as far as like a major awful red flag. However, this being a video game, we are naive and we trust this guy to help us find Rach. So we journey through the little cave here, and of course, immediately I notice this, he's fighting off these monsters. He has an awesome attack. His little fire attack he has, way more powerful than my sword attack. And it makes me realize like maybe I need to start focusing some of my HP points, or I'm sorry, my experience points into the wisdom category, so I can also do some of these amazing magic spells when I get a hold of them. However, as we're heading through here, like I quickly get lost. I have no idea like where I'm supposed to go inside this cave. I wander around. Obviously there's something in here to do, and so I finally just simply have to look it up. And it turns out I take the mattock and have to basically bash through this wall here. How you would ever know to bash through this particular wall and use the mattock to do that? No idea, but regardless, this is the wall you had to do it from, and you do get a new weapon inside there called a sickle. Now the sickle does have a special ability as far as like cutting down plants, but it's also a great attack weapon here because it does a roundabout attack, which is so much better than your sword, so much better than your axe. It may be a little bit weaker, but it does a full roundabout attack. And I just love the weapon variety in the game. Yes, some of them have like a little gimmick behind them, like this one can cut down, plants and whatnot. But you have so many options of like how you want to fight the game. Do you want to use an axe for the distance attack? Do you want to use a sword for more up close attack? Or do you want to do a sickle for more around attack? And the more weapons you get, the more variety you have inside the game. Yes, the combat does take a little while to get used to, but the amount of weapon variety, it's unmatched when it comes to overhead view action RPGs. But we continue to wander around the caves and we finally come to our first official boss inside the game. Yes, I know we had the tiger cat earlier, but that was more like a tutorial boss. This is more of the official mainline story boss. It's this giant dragon that emerges out of the swamp, and of course it can shoot these fireballs at you. And you can use your shield to block the fireballs. However, I also want to point out how good the bosses all look inside this game. Yes, I know there's the first of many. I think there's 15-ish bosses, but they're also well done with enormous sprites, very detailed, very animate actions to go along with it. They're just such well-designed bosses, and so I always looked forward to every single boss battle that came up. Yes, you can sometimes cheese some of them. If you watch my channel, you know I love the cheese bosses, but every boss in this game is unique and is awesome looking. But once you defeat the dragon, you do learn the fire spell, which is an amazing spell. It just sort of sets enemies into a spontaneous combustion and they blow up in a little fire cloud. And I really do enjoy the magic spells. But you do learn that, and you also get a mirror here. And you're supposed to take the mirror back to Mr. Lee, or rather the assistant guarding Mr. Lee's door inside the hotel. You go back to the hotel, present the mirror to the assistant. He turns into a werewolf. I scorched him with my new fire spell. I had to put it to good use, And of course you go in there, and it's almost like a Halloween level because you got owls in here, you have jack-o'-lanterns in here, and mice and zombies. It is definitely a Halloween level that we're journeying through. And even though we just got the sickle and we just got a fire spell, now they're giving us another brand new weapon inside this level, which is going to be the chain. And the chain's more of a distant attack, but it also can be used like a hook shot, sort of like in Zelda, and you can attach to certain things and sort of pull yourself across the room or across gaps with this particular weapon as well. So a lot of these weapons do have individual purposes, but they're also really great attack weapons, and you can sort of choose which style you want to fight inside the game. But as I'm journeying through this little area where Mr. Lee is supposed to be, I finally come to a door I have to get through in order to continue the story, and I need a key in order to get through that particular door. Now, you can buy keys from the shop, and I had bought some keys, but I'd already used all my keys, so I needed another key. So I was like, alright, well I'll just leave the hotel, I'll go buy more keys and come back. However, I go to the exit of the hotel, and it says I can't leave the hotel. And so now I'm stuck in here without a key to advance the storyline. So I wander around the hotel for 30 or 40 minutes trying to find a key, trying to kill a monster that's going to drop a key. I finally look up again inside of a guide and it says the skeletons will sometimes drop keys. So then I must have killed 20 or 30 skeletons, and finally one of them dropped a key for me to open up this door. This is a massive inconvenience if you don't have enough keys inside this game. But regardless, I open up the door, and sure enough, there's a room full of caskets there, and Rachel is inside of that room. Now, this begs a question about our suspicious fella who's helping us out here. How did he know Rachel was in a room full of caskets? This room full of caskets was behind the door that was inside the hotel that was blocked off by a werewolf. And so this guy's looking more and more suspicious. I'm not going to say it anymore, but this guy is a very suspicious helper. But now that we finally have Rach back on our team, we need to finally journey to Wendell to talk to Sheba. However, before we can leave the hotel, Mr. Lee appears, who has been a mysterious fellow up to this point. Once he appears, he turns into a giant vampire bat, and you have your second major boss battle inside the game. And once again, great graphics, great sprite for this particular bat, very unique attacks, throws out little bats at you, and you can block a lot of them, and of course, then use your chain attack if you wanted, or you can use your sword or sickle. It's really your choice on how you want to fight these particular boss battles. I personally did the more of the chain whip. It was the weapon that gave me inside this level, so why not put it to good use? Of course, I just sort of stood back, blocked the bats, did the chain attack at the same time. Once you defeat him, you get another new spell, which is the sleep spell. And so they are really continually giving you new attacks, new spells, new weapons. And I just really love how much you can advance in this game and how unique your playstyle can be. But we are finally out of the hotel. We're on our journey finally of our new weapons, the chain, the sickle. We can finally open up new areas and we can finally journey to Wendell. However, before we do that, I learned my lesson in that last level, and I go straight to the shop and I load up on keys. I buy like 12, 16 keys. I never have to buy keys for the rest of the game because I just simply spent so much money on keys in this particular spot because I am not going to get myself in a predicament where I'm just journeying, wandering aimlessly through a level searching for a key. So we load up on keys. I also load up on the Matic as well, just simply because I don't want to get in a position where I need to bust a wall down and don't have a particular Matic. And so I basically load up on each of those, and I still have enough room in my inventory for other items I can pick up as well, but I definitely want to make sure I'm not stuck because of a lack of being able to bust a wall down or open a door. Now we eventually get to Wendell, and I like this little city here. I like the little cottages, I like the people who live here. You got some old friends, it seems like. The music is phenomenal in Wendell. I mean, just listen to the background music in the video at this point. And so it's a very nice little city, and of course, Sheba's going to be there, and we talked to Sheba, and Sheba basically wants to make sure that Rachel is who she says she is. So he makes her stand on this little platform here. And when she stands there, of course, it opens up this little magical scene here. Rachel's mom appears, lets Rachel know that indeed they are like, seeds of the mana tree. And that the pendant that Rachel has does indeed open up the portal or the waterfall to go to the Tree of Mana. And that she had sealed the Tree of Mana behind the waterfall because of that battle we talked about from the manual against the Emperor of Vandol. And so Rachel now has a pendant that they know for a fact can open up the waterfall in order to get to the Tree of Mana. However, when all of this begins to take place, the city is all of a sudden under attack from the Dark Lords, the city of Glaive, and at this point, our old friend, our mysterious buddy here, our suspicious buddy, takes Rachel and says he's going to take her to safety while I help fight off the masses against the Dark Lord. As I'm doing this, I finally make my way over to a little cliff here, and when I get over there, wouldn't you know it, but our old friend, he's over there with Rachel. He didn't really take her to safety at all. And at that point, our old friend sort of reveals his disguise, and he's actually Julius, which is the Dark Lord's assistant, and they are getting ready to kidnap Rachel. They wanted to make sure that Rachel was indeed who she said she was, and when he saw that Rachel's mom appeared to her, saw that the pendant was indeed with Rachel, and he could use that to open up the waterfall or reverse the waterfall's effects in order to reach the Tree of Mana, that's when he for sure knew he could reveal his true identity and kidnap Rachel. At this point, he knocks me out, and of course, takes Rachel on his little airship, and off they go, obviously getting ready to access the Tree of Mana when they get back to their main city. The story then flips back over to me after I've been revived by Sheba from being knocked out, and now my job is once again to go try to find Rachel, rescue her from Julius, and stop him from using her to get to the Tree of Mana. And so at this point, I don't really know exactly where to go to find this airship, so I begin to explore the area around. I find these little beaches, little crabs to fight off, some new enemies here and there. I have to say the enemy variety in the game is pretty top notch. I mean, every single area inside the game tends to have its own unique enemies, like I mentioned earlier, like the Halloween area. You also have wolves in one area. You got little crabs and whatnot on the beaches. When you get to the snow area, you have like little snowmen. I mean, every little area has its own particular enemies to go with the aesthetic, and not a lot of repeats inside that. The game is I mean, I don't know what the 2 megabytes meant on the front of the cover, but they really did seem to utilize it a lot for graphics, as well as like sprite variety inside the game too. But as I'm exploring all of these new areas, trying to figure out like where to go, what to do to find Rachel, I do come across this little dwarf village here, which is inside of a cave, which makes sense since their line of work is mining, that their village is going to be inside of a cave. And of course, our main friend that we make is going to be Watts, and he's going to actually help us explore some of the caves, fighting the enemies off, sort of like our old friend did earlier with his fire attack. Watts is going to be following us around, also helping to explore the caves. But the main goal inside the caves is to find some silver, to give ourselves a new armor, to allow us to explore some new areas inside the game. But as you're journeying through the cave, it's not just simply going to be fighting enemies or knocking down walls. There's actually these fun little mini games inside of it, like these little carts you get in, and you ride around the carts on these little tracks. You have to hit little switches in order to change like which direction the tracks are going to go in order to get to certain areas inside the cave. And so yes, it is a traditional action RPG, but they have tried to throw in some mini games, some little puzzles to sort of mix it up a little bit as you go along. But of course, as you're exploring the caves, what kind of cave would it be if you didn't get your next boss fight? You get the Megapede here, which is obviously like a giant centipede, and he basically just sort of journeys from one cave opening to another, and you simply have to attack him as he's journeying through. I did figure out if I just simply stay on the ladder here, I can attack him from the ladder, and I don't have to engage him at all. So yeah, it is sort of a cheese fight inside the game, but at the same time, I didn't want to take a chance on dying, and this was a really good little stakeout spot. So the Megapede went down with pretty much minimal damage. But throughout this entire dwarf excursion here, we do get some new armor, we do get a new silver sword, and so we do get some new upgrades when it comes to that. But as soon as we emerge from the little side adventure with the dwarves here, at this point, Bogart has found us again and says that Julius is refueling the airship and we need to hurry as soon as possible to get up there to get on the airship to rescue Rachel. So off we go on our next mission to find the airship. However, the game doesn't tell me where the airship is located at. And so once again, we're just sort of wandering around aimlessly. It's a very linear game. It tells me this is where you got to go, but it doesn't necessarily give me any clear direction how to get there. But eventually we do find the airship here. We climb up on the airship, we explore the airship, we finally find Rachel's cell that she's being held in. She can't get out of the cell, so we need to go around to the back window of the cell to try to rescue her through the outside of it. And of course, when we get over there, she hands over the pendant to me, but wouldn't you know it, Julius appears and he decides to burn the bridge that I'm on the airship, and naturally I fall off of the airship again. I tell you, I am a really good faller inside this game, and every time I fall, somehow it works out that I just simply don't die. And in this particular time, I actually fell through a roof of a house and onto a bed to cushion my fall. Like, what are the chances? I mean, life is just so lucky for me inside this game. But regardless, now I'm inside this bed, and of course when I wake up, the pendant is gone. It turned out my old gladiator friend Amanda was there, and she stole my pendant while I was asleep. And so naturally I'm trying to figure out, well, how the heck do I get my pendant back? So I end up going to her hometown where her and her brother Lester live under the rule of a king named Davius, who evidently is no better than the Dark Lord or Julius or anything like that. However, on my way to journeying to this town, I find what is one of the most awesome things in the entire game, which is a chocobo egg. Now, I did not know that chocobos were in any game except for Final Fantasy, and so to find it in this game was a pretty big treat. Now, this is one of the only references to Final Fantasy inside this game, not enough to justify calling this game Final Fantasy by any means, but it was really cool to actually rescue a chocobo from an egg, and once you rescue him, you can actually ride a chocobo, and when you ride a chocobo, you can just zoom through all these areas. You don't have to fight enemies anymore, you can just make grounds like it's nobody's business, and I mean, it really does speed up the game immensely when you actually get the chocobo. But regardless, you finally get to Amanda in Lester's town here, and of course, when you get there, Amanda's nowhere to be seen, so you go and talk to their leader, who is Devias, and Devias is sitting there with a little parrot beside him. I mean, what evil ruler doesn't have a little parrot beside him? I mean, think about like Jafar, or insert any other evil ruler with a parrot here. But regardless, he says that Amanda has gone to Medusa's cave. Now, Medusa is actually Devias' mother, which is never explained in any form or fashion. That's sort of a little off, side story. But regardless, you do have to head over to Medusa's cave to confront Amanda to try to get the pendant back in order to try to, once again, find Rachel and stop the Tree of Mana from being overtaken by Julius and the Dark Lord. I'm telling you, the game here has a clear direction where it wants to go, but they have so many side stories and side plots to prevent that from happening that you have to solve all along the way. So on our journey to find Amanda in the Medusa cave to get this pendant, we ended up having to solve this ridiculous puzzle here. We had to find a tooth from an alligator, take that tooth back to a boy who gives us a clue of where the next cave is going to be to houses Amanda, and he says 8 palm trees. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm searching for an area with 8 palm trees. I mean, that's what makes sense. That's what the clue said. I search all through the desert for this little area with 8 palm trees. Nowhere in the desert are there 8 palm trees. Finally, I naturally had to look it up again, and there's one area with 2 palm trees, and you have to make a figure 8 around those 2 palm trees. Who is going to figure that out? That has to be a completely accidental thing. And I really don't think the clue really hints at that at all. It would have been better if they said, find the palm trees by the coast and circle them. That would have been a good clue. I would have searched for palm trees by the coast. This was a horrible clue for a horrible area, and there's no way anyone figured this out back in the old days unless they had a guide or they just simply accidentally went around the palm trees. But regardless, we finally go into the little cave here. We find Amanda, and Amanda's not the horrible person that the game had made her out to be. Amanda is still our friend from the beginning of the game. She just simply stole the pendant from us because her leader Devias wanted it and had kidnapped her brother, and said he would not give her brother back to her unless she brought the pendant to him. But when she did that, all he did was turn her brother into a parrot, which was the parrot beside Devias when we went to visit him. and said the parrot can only be turned back to her brother Lester if she has a tear from a Medusa. And so that's why she's in the cave of Medusa, to get a Medusa tear to try to turn her brother back into human. And that also explains why the town that they were in had no music, because he is the town musician and he's the one who plays the harp for the town. And so, holy cow, like a ton of little side stories here, but they're once again all leading us back to getting that pendant. But while we're here, we might as well help her get the tear from a Medusa. So we journey through the little cave here. We do get an ice spell, and we're going to use this ice spell a lot inside the game. The ice spell that we get allows us to shoot out like a little icicle, and when it hits an enemy, it turns it into a cute little snowman, and you can push that snowman onto different, like, you know, little platforms to solve different puzzles. And this game loves their ice puzzles. I mean, once you get the ice power, I would say a solid 80% of the puzzles deal with having to turn the enemy into a snowman and placing them on a particular tile. I'm telling you, the developers loved the ice puzzles in this game. But eventually we do get to the Medusa fight, and the Medusa fight basically is this lady who has snakes on her heads, basically Medusa, and she can throw the snakes at you. And the more damage that she takes, the more snakes she's going to throw out. Now, luckily for us, our shield can block like almost all of the snakes that are thrown at us. So if you sort of stand in the middle and, you know, just sort of wait and block all the snakes, then attack, block all the snakes, then attack, pretty easy fight to go through, and Medusa is taken down. However, when Medusa is getting ready to be taken down, she does basically self-implode, and she doesn't cry along the way, so we did not get a tear of Medusa. However, once again, Amanda happened to be bitten by Medusa in the fight. And if someone is bitten by a Medusa, then they also become a Medusa. So Amanda knows that she is going to quickly turn into Medusa, and she knows that essentially her life is over at this point. And she's going to become a villain, she's going to fight and attack and kill innocent people, and she doesn't want that for herself. So she basically asks you to kill her. And it's a really sad ending here. You get to tear Medusa from her, and then you murder her, and so you put her out of her misery. And once again, just a really sad part of the game here. And you take the tear back to the parrot, and the parrot can turn back to her brother Lester, and music comes back to the town, which makes a lot of sense. But once again, like as I said, that melancholy, sad song at the beginning of the game sets up so many character stories and storylines inside the game of either self-sacrifice or dying or just sad events. And so Amanda's end is once again a very depressing moment in the game. But now that we've got Lester back to being a normal human again, no longer a parrot, he wants to get revenge on Devias for what Devias basically did to his sister and his sister dying in the Medusa cave. So therefore, me and Lester go to find Devias. I'm one to get the pendant. He's one to get revenge. We find Devias. Devias has somehow turned into a squid-headed monster here. And we go up and attack him. And this battle here is where I start learning a new strategy in the game, which is basically just go up to the boss and just wail away at it. And then when my health gets low, use my spell to cure myself or continue to heal myself over and over and over. And by doing that, I can continue to attack, heal, and I can have the bosses defeated in almost no time. The bosses are still really cool to see. Some are still pretty difficult, but for the most part, I'm going to start taking this strategy on a lot of the bosses that are coming up. However, right before we finish this boss off, he reveals that he gave the pendant to Garuda. He no longer has the pendant anymore, and so now I'm back at square one yet again, searching for this pendant to try to stop this tree of Manta from being abducted. And so here we go all over again. I like the storyline for this game. I really do, as far as like the overarching story, but it just sort of seems like every time we almost get the pendant or we almost rescue Rachel, she's kidnapped again, or we lose the pendant, she's kidnapped it, or we lose the pendant. And it's like the game probably could have a little bit more creativity to connect all of these events together instead of just simply repeating the lost pendant or kidnapped Rachel over and over and over. But regardless, now we're on a mission again to try to go to Garuda to find this pendant. Now, if you're wondering like where to go next inside the game, well, there was a poisonous gas area, but when Lester plays his harp, that poisonous gas somehow like dissipates, which I don't know how harps and gases correlate, but maybe there's some sort of magic in the mana world where harps destroy poisonous gases. And we can finally go along this little path here. And there's some new enemies we can explore, like some landfish and some mole men and gorillas. I mean, like I said earlier, the game does a really good job of finding like different sprites and different enemies to place all throughout the game, so you never get like bored of the same enemies, and it really tells like the landscapes apart just simply by which enemies are in which areas. But it's also in this area that the storyline tends to slow down a little bit, and we're starting to just fight some random bosses in the area, get some random weapons in the area. Like we fight against this giant crab, it looks like it belonged in like Mario 2. We fight a Cyclops who gives us a Morning Star, which is an amazing weapon, like circles around you, also has a pretty good attack, pretty good distance, also can bust walls out like a Matic, and it's a great weapon to have, and probably the one I use the most throughout the game. We also fight against a golem here, and all of these bosses are pretty good bosses in the game, but this part of the game here seems to be most disconnected from the story, and it's like they just sort of had extra bosses, and they just sort of wanted to stuff them in best they could without slowing the storyline down too much. And honestly, I sort of like the way they did it this way. I think this would have been a good part for the game to sort of like branch into like 3 separate paths, since you're fighting like 3 separate monsters, and you get to sort of choose which direction you want to go in, but the game still stuck pretty linear through this. But I think if the game had been made like 2 years later, like after Link's Awakening, I really think they would have probably split the path up a little bit and given you more options on which way you wanted to go. But once we've defeated all 3 of these monsters, we discovered that the pendant is once again back in the hands of the Dark Lord through being transferred all, and so we finally make our way back to the original castle from the very beginning of the game, and we can't go back through our little gladiator entrance here, but we have to go down through the sewers. And when we go through the sewers, then we sort of climb the back wall of the castle, work our way up, and this is one of the most beautiful areas in the game, or I guess not really like beautiful areas, but one of the most well-designed areas in the game as far as like a varied scenery, feels very realistic for what they're trying to accomplish, or at least matches up so well with what the storyline's going for here. When we finally get to the top of the tower, we have to fight against the Chimera, which is a pretty cool looking boss, but once again, our same strategy takes him out pretty quickly here. But still, really good sprite, really good design, and I can't say enough good things about the bosses. And we finally get to the Dark Lord, and we fight against the Dark Lord up here. Very easy boss battle. We finally get a pendant, but we also discover this time he gave us a fake pendant, and Julius has the real pendant, still has Rachel. They go down to the front of the waterfall. He's got Rachel hypnotized here, gets her to reverse the waterfall, and up they go to the Tree of Mana for him to finally take over and become the Dark Overlord that he wants to be across the entire land and have complete control of the Tree of Mana. And during the process of all this, I get knocked off the cliff again. It's amazing how many falls I can take in this particular game. And this time I actually fall into a little desert or a little crystal or mine town here. And it's an odd little area, especially when you consider I fell off like the same cliff while I wouldn't fall in the same area as last time. I don't know. The game chooses not to explain that. But now I'm in a new area and there's some new friends to help me out. Sarah is a healer in the area, heals me up. Dr. Bow Wow, or Bow Wow, I'm not really sure which way it's pronounced in the game. He takes my chocobo, takes his broken legs, somehow he broke his legs in the fall I guess, gives him like mechanical legs, and now my chocobo can not only run across land, but it can also run across the water, which is really cool. Bogart's back in this area as well. He fell off the ship, broke his back. I mean, like, holy cow, this game is like got some crazy injuries in it as well. And Bogart's really annoyed at me. I mean, he's a Geminite, and he's afraid that I'm not going to live up to the Geminite status, and so he's all upset about it. But then, of course, when I go on a few missions, Bogart turns his tune around here, and he once again believes in me. And so now I've got my new chocobo here with its mechanical legs. I got Bogart believing in me, and I've got to really figure out how to get back up to that sanctuary where the mana tree is at. And like I said, Bogart is beginning to believe in me again, believes I have what it takes to fulfill this journey, and tells me I need to get the sword called Excalibur in order to finally defeat Julius. Now, Excalibur is somehow buried out in the desert, and so he said Sheba is going to know how to help me get this particular. He says Sheba is going to be the one who's going to be able to help tell me where Excalibur is located at. However, Sheba is now located in the city of Lauren, which has been completely frozen away in the frozen wasteland, and I got to figure out a way to unfall that city in order to talk to Sheba, in order to get the clues of how to get this sword, in order to go attack Julius. Like, so many like diversions in this story. So off we journey to the snowfields. We journey through the snowfields. We got some awesome little enemies over here. You know, very winter aesthetic enemies like the snowmen. And we also get one of the best enemies in the game, ducks with helmets. I don't know why they're in this particular area, but I enjoy a little duck in a helmet. It reminds me of something out of like DuckTales or something. I don't know, or maybe Darkwing Duck, more like Darkwing Duck. But I love the ducks and the helmets. As we journey through here, though, we finally fight against a monster. It's like a snake monster named Carrie. And once again, pretty easy. Cool looking sprite. I mean, the game tends to be high quality with all of its bosses. Of course, we defeat Carrie. It unfalls Lauren. We get to go back to Lauren. We get to talk to Sheba. Sheba, once again, gives us a bone key now. And the bone key is going to help us unlock Excalibur in the middle of the desert. And as we journey out to the desert, we end up coming across this crazy looking boss. And what was its name? The Lich Monster. And the Lich Monster is this crazy creature here that can basically destroy you in just a matter of a couple hits. And this is probably one of the toughest bosses in the game until we get to the very, very end of the game. And he's going to give us the nuke spell. And it's at this point I realized I got like a lightning spell, a fire spell, an ice spell, a sleep spell, a mute spell, this nuke spell. And I was like, I've not used like any of these spells. I've been really pretty conservative because all the spells that are really required for puzzles have been like the ice spell. I was like, it's time to finally discover what all of these spells do. So I go out in the middle of the desert, I start using them all. The lightning was pretty cool. The nuke was a little bit disappointing because I thought it was going to like destroy everything on the screen. It just like shot one little energy bolt out and killed one fella. And so that was a little bit on the disappointing side. The sleep spell put everybody to sleep, which was pretty cool. I don't use it a whole lot in the game. And the mute spell like slowed everybody down. I don't necessarily like, use all of these spells in the game, but I do love the idea that they give us a lot of options of like how to play the game. Like I said earlier, you have like 6 or 7 different spells. You got like 6 or 7 different weapons you can use, and you can charge the different weapons up with your stamina bar. And so by the time you take all that into account, you've got like probably 20 weapons or 20 different attacks you can use inside the game, which I think is pretty phenomenal, especially for a Game Boy title. And if you've been hearing some meowing in the background, the culprit. But now I think I've pretty much got like every spell in the game, and now I'm journeying to Falling Rock Cave in order to finally get the Excalibur sword. Now when I get there, there's a pretty good boss here too, the Kraken, and you actually fight on a little bridge, and he has like his little squid arms that come up and try to attack you from the left and from the right. And I use the Morning Star here because you can actually swing it around and sort of stop some of the attack that's coming in. It's probably one of the harder bosses as far as like to cheese in a way, but it's a really cool looking boss. I mean, I really do enjoy the idea of like fighting on the bridge. And like, I think they have remade this game at some point, but I would love to see this game like remade as like a 3D, you know, action adventure along the lines of like, I don't know, I'm gonna say like the Dark Souls games because why not? I love those series. But I mean, just like a 3D adventure game or like Zelda, I would love to see this game get like that kind of treatment. Because the bosses in this game are just so plentiful and they're such fun designs, and I can only imagine like what a full-fledged like adventure game like that could bring to life of all of these different creatures. And speaking of other fun bosses, on your journey to finally get the Excalibur, you are going to fight against what's called the Iflight, which if I'm saying that correct, I've never heard that word before, but the Iflight, and Iflight's going to be like a almost like a crab-like walking creature, but it can turn itself into like a lava ball and roll around the screen. Once again, a pretty tough boss, but when you fight the Iflight and you get him defeated, you then get a rusted sword, and you're like, holy cow. So after all this, I still didn't get the Excalibur sword. I'm still not where I want to be in order to finally fight Julius. But, I mean, we did have like a little bit of an inkling here. I mean, why would he give us a horrible, crappy sword like the rusted sword if we didn't really expect it to turn into something awesome a little bit later? So then I go back to my main, I guess, story drivers inside the game here. I go back to Sheba as well as Dr. Bow Wow or Bow Wow or however you say his name. And I go back to them and they tell me that the rusted sword can reveal its true power in the Dime Tower, and the Dime Tower is hidden inside of the desert. And of course, if you go into the desert and you blow up this one particular crystal with the nuke, the Dime Tower will then reveal itself. And once again, how anyone would figure out like this is the exact one that they would have to blow up. I mean, Nintendo Power probably made a fortune off of this game if I was guessing. But when you finally get down to the Dime Tower, like you watch it like emerge from the ground here, like holy cow, I think like most heroes would just give up and they're like, how many floors is in this particular tower that I'm going to have to climb here? And they're like, I'm just exhausted even looking at it, and they probably just walk home at this point. But you know, our protagonist here, Ogles, he's not one to just sort of give up, so he goes ahead and enters into the Dime Tower. Now, the Dime Tower, it's pretty standard as far as, you know, it's normal puzzles. It's got the snow puzzles in it, it's got the tile puzzles in it. At one point, you do fight a mantis ant or ant mantis. Looks like a Cypher from Pokemon. You fight against him, which is a pretty cool little boss. Some new enemies inside the tower as well. I mean, it wouldn't be this particular game if it didn't include new enemies in every single little area. And so they've done a good job with all of the additions as they go. It's also in this, you get a new assistant that's going to help you out from Dr. Bow Wow's, and it's going to be Marcia, which is basically like this little robot. Looks like it's from Lost in Space or something. It helps you throughout the entire tower, and you finally get to the top, and you're fighting off Garuda here, which is this giant eagle that comes down from the top of the tower. Now, as I was going through this fight, all I could think about was Link's Awakening, because at one point you climb to Eagle's tower, you get to the top, and this giant eagle attacks you on top of the tower. And in this particular game, you climb this giant tower, you get to the top, and a giant eagle comes down and attacks you. And this game was well before Link's Awakening. And so I can't help but think, like, Link's Awakening at least saw this, took some inspiration from it, and did like their own version of it. I refuse to believe Link's Awakening did not borrow this from Final Fantasy Adventure. Now, after you defeat Garuda, the tower begins to collapse here, and you and Marcy, you run to the edge, and a little platform falls apart, and you're gonna have to, of course, jump over that platform, but it's too far for you to jump. So Marcy says, hey, look, I can pick you up, throw you across the platform, and then I'll jump over myself afterwards. And so, we take the advice, he throws us across, and then Marcy says, I can't jump. Like, I can't do that. It's not my turn. I purposely threw you over there so you would survive, but I was built for this tower, and this is it for me. And it's like, holy cow. Even though it's a robot, it's another death inside the game. And it's like, the game is just brutal when it comes to introducing characters, killing them off. Sacrifice characters constantly. I mean, we have this one, we have Amanda, possibly a Seam at the start of the game. I mean, that melancholy theme on the title screen really is so symbolic of this entire game. And I keep talking about that one particular song, and I don't want you to get the wrong impression, but that is like the best song in the game. But there are actually a ton of really good tracks throughout this entire experience. But after we've escaped the crumbling of the Dime Tower here, we journey back to the waterfall from the very start of the game. And with our new sword here, we can finally basically escalate ourselves up into the Garden of Mana. And when we get there, first we have to go through this little palace area, and there are 3 dragons we have to defeat inside the palace. And none of the dragons are particularly hard, especially if you sort of take the strategy I did of like staying off to the side, wait for them to come around and shoot your little spear weapon up there and hit them from a distance, because the hitbox is really, really small on these particular sprites, and you have to hit like perfectly on the head. And if you just rush into the battle, man, it's really hard. And so I really decided just simply to take the cheese route, stand off to the side, keep shooting my little spear up there, got them no trouble. Now, the first 2 dragons are like identical. They're basically, I think they're called something different, like Dragon and Red Dragon, but they're the same dragon. The 3rd dragon is a little more like a bone dragon or a zombie dragon or something like that. And he's a little bit different. It's more akin to the very first dragon you fought in the game inside the swamp. But once again, you just sort of stay in the upper corner here, bait him out on his attacks, come down, shoot a little, spear out, go back up there, and just sort of keep doing the same strategy over and over. He's not too bad either, and once you've defeated all 3 of those dragons, now you can officially go into what's known as the Garden of Mana. This is where the Tree of Mana is going to be located at. And there's a beautiful area inside the game. I mean, this is like what heaven would look like. I mean, just nature scenes all around, trees blossoming. I mean, this is a beautiful, beautiful area. But it's when you're in this Garden of Mana that Rachel's mom appears once again, and she finally gives you the Excalibur sword, and this is what you're going to finally be able to use to take out Julius. Now, there are 3 stages to the final boss in the game. Julius, stage 1 is like multiple versions of Julius all around you. Super easy, almost like normal bad guys. Just take them out, no trouble. Second stage of Julius looks like something out of like a cyberpunk horror movie. I mean, this boss is crazy looking. Still not super hard, especially if you're using more like the cure spell and whatnot as you're journeying through it. Not too bad. But the 3rd stage of Julius here, where he like appears in front of the mana tree, it looks like a old man monster, best way I can describe him here. Cool looking sprite, I just don't know what he is really. He's really, really tough, because what he does is he appears, shoots out these attacks at you, then disappears, and then reappears and shoots out 2 more nuke attacks at you. And my best advice for this particular battle is if you talk to Rachel, she can continue to heal you up. And so continue talking to her throughout the entire battle. Keep yourself constantly healing. And anytime Julius disappears, run to the spot that he was at, because he will never appear in the same spot twice, at least from what I noticed anyway. And so he appears here, run over there after he disappears, wait for him to appear again, go up and get a couple of attacks on him, and then stand where he was at. And it's still a very difficult fight, don't get me wrong. This is the hardest fight in the game, like par none. Like none of the other fights even came close to Julius, especially when you consider I'd already used up like all of my healing spells and all my healing items in this battle, and I was depending solely on Rach to keep my health going as we're fighting through it. but eventually you are able to destroy Julius. However, when he dies, he destroys the entire mana tree with himself. And so therefore there is no tree of life basically circulating through the planet now. And at this point, Rachel's mom appears again, sort of like in ghost form, I guess, and tells Rach, like, look, you are the final mana seed, and it's up to you, essentially, to become the next tree of mana. Now, once you're gone, like, that's the end of the mana trees. There are no more, but we can continue having life on this planet. We continue having goodness on this planet if you just simply, basically, sacrifice yourself and become the next mana tree. And Rach has to make that decision for herself. She decides to become the next mana tree, sacrifices herself in order for the planet to continue on and have life for it at least another extended amount of time. And of course, your job now becomes to be the next Gemini, and so your job is essentially to guard Rach, guard the tree of mana for the rest of your known life as well. And so it's once again a sad ending here to Rach. She has sacrificed herself in order for the world to continue. And so the game is very much of a sacrificing game, or self-sacrificing game, in order to help others and for the betterment of the world, and to just simply keep the planet going in general. And so it's a very sad game, but it's also a very meaningful game at the same time. Now, following Rachel's sacrifice, of course, we get to the little end credits here, scrolling through, great music in the background, some of the greatest hits of the towns and the areas of the game, and you have this the end screen, and you get to see the new tree of mana, which is Rach sprouting from the ground. And what a impactful and beautiful ending to a beautiful game as overall. Was it a little convoluted at times or a little bit unnecessarily confusing? Absolutely. There were so many instances where, oh no, the pendant's been captured again. Oh no, Rach has been captured again. Better talk to this person, better talk to this person. And some of that could have been cut out, or at least maybe a little more streamlined to some degrees, because it did feel like the story was sort of padded to keep the gameplay going, or at least to fit in all the bosses that they wanted to inside the game. And so I feel like the story could have been a little more streamlined. However, I still like the story as an overall. It's a sad story, it's a melancholy story, but it's a meaningful story at the same time. And I can't help but think this is one of the best stories that's been portrayed inside of a Game Boy game. Now, if you really wanted to dive deeper into the lore of the story, like I said, the manual has an entire backstory for the war or the battle that took place before this particular game. There's also like stone tablets inside the Dime Tower that gives a whole backstory, once again, elaborating even more about the battle of Vendol that took place inside the manual as well. And so there is a lot of expansion inside the story, and I could see him even doing like a prequel to this game at some point as well. The strength of this game, or one of the strengths of the game, is definitely the story. Like I said, there were a few missteps in the story, but as an overall, excellent story for this game. Another big pro for this game is just simply the weapon variety, the spell variety, and just like you choosing your own way you want to play for this game. Do you want to play as a mage? Do you want to play as more of a melee character? Which weapons, which spells do you want to focus on? How do you want to develop your character with all your leveling up? I mean, it has a really deep combat system. Like I said, I wasn't a huge fan of like how it fought at first, as far as like not being able to stun enemies. But by the end of the game, I was completely used to that, and that's just simply how you had to play the game. It was just a mechanic that they chose, or a direction that they chose to go in, and I got pretty used to it. By the end of the game, I still prefer the other way, like in the traditional Zelda game, but it's not a bad combat system. It just takes a little bit of time to get used to it, but I love how much variety there is in the combat system, and even the leveling up system. I mean, instead of having to like just simply choose one direction and stay with that, anytime you focused on a particular skill, it still leveled up some of the ones around that in order for you to still have somewhat of a well-rounded character, because they knew you're going to want to experiment with at least some of the spells, some of the melee weapons, and I feel like the game allowed you to pick your distinct skill, but still let you have fun with the other weapons and spells at the same time. So overall, would I recommend playing Final Fantasy Adventure in 2023, 2024, or in the future? Yes, I would definitely recommend playing this game. Fans of the Zelda series will definitely enjoy Final Fantasy Adventure. Fans of Final Fantasy, I think, will enjoy Final Fantasy Adventure because of the storyline, because of the RPG elements in the game. I do believe when you play the game, it's best to play it with a strategy guide or a walkthrough, just simply so you know where to go in the game, and it sort of helps you out a little bit. Yeah, you can figure it out on your own, but it'll take many, many more hours just simply trying to figure out where to go, when you can sort of streamline a little bit and still have just as much fun. Is it as good as Link's Awakening on the Game Boy? Absolutely not. That's like one of my favorite games of all time. But it's definitely a really good Game Boy game, and I'd recommend, if you're a fan of old retro games, to give Final Fantasy Adventure a try. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. If there's another Game Boy game you'd like to see me cover sooner than later, let me know in the comments down below the name of that game. Of course, I'll move it up in the queue of which ones we cover first. But as always, go out there, find a great game to play. Just simply have a great rest of the day.